Good afternoon and a happy St. Patrick's Day, of course, to everyone. My name is Carla Salp. I am the Public Engagement Specialist with the Washington State Department of Agriculture, and I am an agency spokesperson for our Asian Giant Hornet project. I'm excited today to be moderating this joint press conference, which is bringing together so many agencies that have a role in the detection and eradication of Asian Giant Hornets from North America. This afternoon, we will be hearing from several agencies who will share their plans for the 2021 season. Speaking today will be Sven Spieschiger with the Washington State Department of Agriculture, Paul van Westendorf with the British Columbia Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries, Anne LeBrun, National Policy Manager for Honeybee and Pollinator Pest Programs in the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, Anna Childers with USDA's Agricultural Research Service Bee Research Laboratory. We will take questions after the speakers have made their statements. In addition, the following individuals will be available for questions as well. Gail Wallen with the Invasive Species Council of British Columbia, Timothy Lawrence with Washington State University Extension, and hopefully Chris Looney with Washington State Department of Agriculture. Washington Invasive Species Council expressed their regret that they were unable to participate today. However, their executive director, Justin Bush, is always happy to answer questions about the council's role if you would like to reach out to him directly. We are approaching that time of year when the public may start spotting Asian giant hornets, so we'd like to ask your help once again in spreading the word that every suspected Asian giant hornet sighting should still be reported, whether it's in Washington or British Columbia. People should report to the Department of Agriculture or the invasive species managers in their own state or province. Last year, half of Washington's confirmed detections and all of BC's confirmed detections came from alert community members, so the importance of participation from local residents really cannot be overstated. One last reminder, please keep your line muted to ensure the best sound quality for everyone. Sven, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
All right, can you hear me then, Carla?
Yes, we can. Thanks, Sven.
Okay, so thank you everybody for taking a few moments this afternoon just to hear about our plans. We have noticed we've been getting a few inquiries about what we're planning to do for 2021. So we thought we would take this opportunity to get everybody together and just let you know a little bit about what happened last year and of course what we will be doing moving forward in 2021. So obviously 2020 was a very exciting year for everybody, and that was for all of the citizens of Washington because we had so much help from everybody. You know, over 1,200 folks chose to hang traps and service them on their own dime, and this really helped us to get a very good understanding of what was going on in our state and allowed us to focus our resources and the resources provided by the USDA APHIS in an area where we already knew we had detected some hornets. And so thank you to everybody, first of all. Everyone's efforts ended up netting us 31 detections last year, with one of those public reports turning into a few subsequent trap catches and then the eventual tracking of a hornet back to the nest where we were able to perform the eradication. And none of this was possible without the teamwork of most of the agencies on this call today, and also without the help of the citizens and the folks who really stepped up and, you know, helped us to get the job done in 2020. So in 2021, we did actually learn a few things that we're going to be putting into the field, and a couple of those come from joint ventures with the Mount Baker beekeepers and a few other folks who were helping us test lures and other things along the way in 2020. And what we did learn is that a bait that we have used in the East Coast for many years in hornet trapping is just a simple mixture of 1 cup of brown sugar to 1 cup of water. And using this as a bait is a very exciting thing for our citizen scientists because orange juice and rice wine can actually be fairly costly, whereas a cup of brown sugar honestly is not all that expensive. And there's an added bonus if you're going to be a citizen scientist this year. If you choose the brown sugar bait, you can obviously, I'm sorry, not obviously, but you can actually go to a 2-week service period, which means you would only need to check your trap every 2 weeks. The second thing we're doing with our citizen scientists this year, other than giving them the choice to use either the orange juice and rice wine versus the brown sugar bait, is that they will not be required to mail all samples in. WSDA felt it was extremely important to make sure that traps that we were recommending for use in the field were not killing a huge percentage of native pollinators and other insects that could be beneficial. And we did get enough information, and we'll be releasing that very soon, especially to share it with the trappers who participated. And we are very confident that we are not causing more harm than we intend to when we're going out to eradicate Asian giant hornet. And so those are the really big changes, is that citizen scientists will have a selection of bait this year. And if you choose the one, it's not only less expensive, you can actually get away with a 2-week service period instead of a 1-week service period. And that's a big step forward for us. Here at the WSDA, obviously, we learned quite a bit from our trapping last year. And Carla will make available a graphic of our proposed survey grids where we will be focusing our resources in 2021. We were generously awarded a Farm Bill Plant Pest Act 7721 grant, which will allow us to do hornet survey, tracking, and eradication, and we will continue with the efforts that we started last year. Obviously, we know an area to work in. It's mostly in northern Whatcom County. We're going to continue to watch around the area where we received a single detection of Asian giant hornet in Bellingham last year, but for the most part, we're going to be able to continue to make sure that Washington is protected from Asian giant hornet. And again, we can't thank the citizen scientists enough, and we hope a lot of folks will take us up and help us keep an eye on the rest of the state by running traps themselves again. Carla, was there anything else I needed to touch on?
No, I think that covered it. I did just put a link into the chat for those that have access to the chat function of the map that Sven referenced, of the grid of where our maps will be, excuse me, the map of where our traps will be. And it is also available. I added a link to our online press release, which is available at agr.wa.gov. If you go to the very bottom of the press release we sent out on Monday, there is now a link there to that map if you'd like to download that map. Anything else, Sven?
Nope, I yield the floor to my esteemed colleagues.
Okay, great. Next up, we will have Paul Van Westendorf with the British Columbia Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries. Paul, go ahead and unmute yourself and go ahead and give your statement.
Well, thank you very much, Carla. Thanks for the invitation. I think that it is worth, to start out with, important for everyone to understand that we don't operate in isolation. I am very, very grateful and appreciative of the partnership and the cooperation that we have received from our friends down south, because this is not just a BC problem or a Washington state problem. It is a collective problem that we try to address. For the coming year, for 2021, we of course base much of our activities on our experience from last year. And last year, here in the Fraser Valley, we have put out a lot of traps that we will put out again. And we had only very meager harvests compared to what you had down in Washington state. We had a grand total of 6 hornets sighted, and those hornets were all reported by the public. None of them were in our traps. So it means that the public at large, as well as numerous agencies and beekeepers and people in that whole entire area, play a critical role in the success of this ongoing survey. So this is what we're going to do again. We are going to put traps out, and again, I'm very grateful for the magic elixir that I received from Washington State. It is in particular novel pheromone that we will also be using in some of the traps. to entice those hornets to come into the traps. We will have a crew of people that will monitor this on a weekly basis, and hopefully we will be successful. And again, there are numerous agencies involved in doing this, and maybe we will have nothing to show for at the end of 2021, which would suggest that the Hornets don't like British Columbia. And I think we are just very happy with that if that's the case. I should refer briefly also to two other areas that were surveyed last year, and that was on Vancouver Island, where, of course, in Nanaimo in 2019, the very first Asian giant hornet was detected, and also a nest was detected and successfully destroyed. Since that time, no single hornet had been sighted or collected or anything. There are two key areas. It doesn't matter here in this conversation where they were, but of course one of them would be in Nanaimo, and none of them reported any sightings or any hornet collections. So we will do that again this year in 2021. And if again there are no reports of these Asian giant hornets on Vancouver Island after 2 years of absence, then hopefully we will be able to declare Vancouver Island free of Asian giant hornets. So much of our focus and attention will be on the Fraser Valley. I think that that's basically what we will be doing in 2021.
Thank you so much, Paul. Appreciate that. Next up, we have Anne Lebrun with USDA APHIS.
Thanks, Carla. So in December of 2019, the APHIS National Taxonomic Specialist confirmed WSDA's identification of an Asian giant hornet, or Vespa mandarinia. In response to the detection, APHIS has worked closely with WSDA to provide funding, technical expertise, methods, and technology. APHIS provided the radio transmitter technology that WSDA used to track a hornet to its nest in October. As a result, Washington officials were able to find and eradicate that nest, helping to protect honeybee populations in the area. This was a significant achievement in the fight against this pest because it validated a crucial eradication method to trap, tag, and track. APHIS is coordinating research with USDA's Agriculture Research Service, or ARS, and academia to examine Asian giant hornet population genetics. And lastly, APHIS, ARS, and WSDA are working together to develop and test new lures that will improve the effectiveness of Asian giant hornet traps. Back to you, Carla.
Thanks so much, Anne. And next we have Anna Childers with USDA's Agricultural Research Service. Sorry, Anna, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Thank you, and thank you again for the invitation. In May of 2020, ARS scientists received a single hornet from the first Asian giant hornet nest that was found in North America on Vancouver Island. From that specimen, an ARS program called the Ag 100 Pest Initiative released the first complete genome assembly of Asian giant hornet in August of 2020. We are currently working on a new improved genome from a more properly preserved specimen from the first U.S. colony that was eradicated by WSDA in October of 2020. Additionally, as Anne mentioned, we're collaborating with APHIS to gather and sequence specimens from Asian giant hornet populations across their native range to understand diversity within the Asian giant hornet population and better determine if there are indeed any genetically unique subpopulations. We are hopeful these data will allow determination of the origin of the Asian giant hornet population in North America. Knowing the origin is important to control efforts because it may offer a better understanding of nesting biology and potential range, which varies in native populations. In addition to genome sequencing, there's also much more work ongoing or planned at ARS. In collaboration with WSDA, APHIS, and scientists in Japan, ARS researchers are testing pheromones, repellents, and attractants identified from oak sap, fermentation baits, and volatiles from honey beehives. The goal is to identify chemicals to which Asian giant hornets are highly sensitive in order to develop a synthetic lure. These scientists are also comparing trap and lure types to increase their effectiveness. ARS scientists are also characterizing other compounds from the Asian giant hornet's venom glands that are reported to be alarm and marking pheromones, as well as the venom proteins themselves. Another group of ARS researchers are studying the microbes, the bacteria, fungi, and viruses that are carried by Asian giant hornets. This data may lead to the discovery and development of biological control methods. Finally, Matt Buffington with the ARS Systematic Entomology Laboratory is in discussions with the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History. They are very interested in having a display on the Asian giant hornet when the museum reopens that would feature a piece of Nest Zero that was eradicated by WSDA. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anna. And just briefly before we get into the questions, we had anticipated having Chris Looney on. I don't see him on the list, but there are a bunch of call-in users. Just want to check. Chris Looney, were you able to log in? Doesn't sound like it. So I apologize that. It sounds like something must have prohibited Chris from being able to participate. So it doesn't sound like he will be on and available for questions. But we will be taking questions now, and a couple of reminders. Please do not unmute your own line. I will unmute that for you. If you have a question, please use the raise your hand function, and I'll call on you, and then at that point, I'll unmute your line so you can ask your question. And then you can always ask questions using the chat function. I saw one already that asked Sven to say his name again, and so it's Sven Spieschiger. And when asking your question, if we unmute your line, please identify your news agency and let us know to whom you're directing your question. So go ahead and use the raise your hand function if you have a question. We'll start with Craig McCulloch. I'm going to unmute your line, Craig. Oh, I apologize. There we go.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go for it.
Awesome. All right. I'm using a laptop I haven't done this on before, so hooray. The question I have for all of you, in particular to Paul, is with the border restrictions on COVID-19, how has that impacted what you're doing, and what role is that border closure playing in all of your efforts? Again, that's for Paul and for anybody else who wants to comment. And I'm asking this question on behalf of KNKX Radio.
Well, Greg, yes, the border is an imaginary line. And look, we thank God there is such a thing as FaceTime and phone calls and everything else. And even the Postal Service are quite excellent in delivering products and materials so that we can coordinate some of our activities. And for example, I have written down the recipe that Sven just popularized about half a cup of, or 1 cup of brown sugar and 1 cup of water. This is what we're going to do. So no, it's just simply not really a big issue, other than that I have apparently an open invitation from Sven to participate in the festivities of eradicating the next nest that they find. And of course, it is a reciprocal offer, and that if we find a nest out here, he is cordially invited to participate in it. Whether or not this is going to work with the border, we do not know, but I think I have full confidence in it eventually being possible for us to visit each other.
Thanks, Paul. Sven, did you have any comments on that, or Ann or Anna?
No, not really. Actually, Conrad Berube was able to get through the border and visit us to give some of his expertise. Conrad, of course, is famously known for being the trigger man on the eradication of the first nest destroyed in North America. And it was very nice to get some of his insights and put them to use in the field.
Great, thanks, Sven. There was, Sven, I'm going to leave you up because there was a question about how many total confirmed sightings there were in Washington last year from Megan.
31.
Sure, it was 31, and 16 of those were called in through our outreach campaign, and the other 15 were trapped or hand netted as part of some, investigations from our paid staff here. One thing to note about that is that does not count the some 500 specimens that are involved in the first nest eradication. So, two very distinct things. There were about 500 specimens of all life stages associated with the nest, and there were about 31 detections total through outreach and our trapping efforts.
Great, thanks, Sven. It says St. John Alexander, maybe it's Alexander St. John. Go ahead and ask your question.
It says unmute me. Is that all right there? You got it?
Yes, I'm sorry. When I click unmute you, it says it's sending a request. So you are good to go.
We're good to go. No, it's okay, Carla. It's St. John. It's a weird name. I should have put it down phonetically. My question is, of course, it's called the murder hornet, and it sounds like, I know Paul's going to laugh. There he is. He's shaking his head now. But we heard that you might want us to put up nests in certain spots. Is that what you want us to do? Pardon me. Do you want us to put our own traps up? And is there any danger? People are going to ask that. Are there any dangers if I put up a trap around my house?
If I can answer the question, of course, if there is direct exposure of you to a hornet's nest, and particularly when you happen to disturb it, there is absolute serious personal danger to your health and well-being. But I really invite everyone to look at this in context. The Asian giant hornet is an apex predator. And by definition, apex predators are not very densely populated in their natural range. They will be there, and they are very dangerous when you actually run into them, but the total density of the number of them is going to be very limited. And it is, in fact, one of the main reasons we have so much trouble finding these darn nests, because there are such a few of them around. So if you have a trap in there in your house or near your house, not in your house, sorry, near where you live, and you find some unusually large wasp or hornet-like creature in there, all what I would suggest is, depending on where you live, you either call Sven or you call me, and we will deal with it. When we find a nest, we're not going to have everybody around. We are going to have a crew that is very familiar with stinging insects, with bees and with wasps, and we will eradicate it accordingly. Yes, but we would like to basically use the public's eyes to report sightings, because we just don't have enough resources to be everywhere all the time. So yes, these are intimidating insects, and I certainly would encourage everyone to be very respectful of them in case they are found near your place or wherever they are found.
Sven, do you want to share some of your experience finding the nest? I think you and Chris were standing right next to it for a little while.
Yeah, certainly I can do that. So when you ask, am I really in danger? It's a relative question. We got there when it was very cold, and in our particular instance, they weren't too aggressive. I was literally standing under the entrance when it was found. That's surprising and shocking to a person, mostly because we were looking down on the ground, because most of them nest in the ground. Ours, of course, was 8 foot up in a tree. I think, to me, what really set home is, as I looked up from where I was standing, I saw a children's play set. I saw a kennel for an outdoor dog. And as the homeowner came home, he remarked to me, you know what, I drive my lawnmower past this all the time. And so to me, that is the real danger. Having something that could really cause you a really serious world of hurt, unbeknownst to you, living on your property, that is really what puts you in danger. So to me, hanging a trap actually protects you. It lets you know that there's something in the area and contains it in such a way that you could then call either Paul or myself, and we can do something about it. The worst part is you get your lawnmower maybe a little too close, and you're overwhelmed before you even know what's happening. And that's to me what the real danger is.
Correct.
Thanks, Ben. I'm going to pull a couple of questions from the chat. There were 2 questions from Don Jenkins that were related. Don Jenkins, Capital Press, asks, what will WSDA bait its traps with, and how many traps will WSDA put out?
Okay, so we will primarily bait with orange juice and rice wine. We're running a subset side by side with brown sugar and water, just to keep up with our citizen scientists, because we expect a lot of folks will select that option. Again, we know that that works from work we did back east over the last 10 years or so. So we're very excited to see if we can make a full switch over to that. We may also choose to test a few other things presented to us by ARS, and I would invite them to go into more details about what those are. And then the total number of traps is we are shooting for at least 1 trap per 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer grid. And again, Carla has that graphic available. And that's going to total somewhere a little over 1,500 traps for us. And we will add traps should detections warrant that. And what I mean by that is last year we were prepared to survey in and around the Blaine area as far down as Custer, and we got a hit down in Bellingham, so we added a survey grid down in Bellingham. And so we are prepared to respond in that manner as well this year should the need arise.
Thanks, Ben. And we have, it says N Jennings. I'm going to unmute from my side. You'll have to unmute from your side. And then you can go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, this is Nicole Jennings with Cairo Radio and MyNorthwest.com. I want to know, is it still likely that there are at least 2 nests in the downtown Blaine and then the Birch Bay Custer area? And if so, how optimistic are you that you'll be able to eradicate these nests within the year?
Okay, good question. So let's talk about the life cycle a little bit. As a nest progresses through the year, towards the fall, it will produce breeding casts, so new queens and males. They will mate and go out and form new nests. So the original nests that you're speaking of, that there was evidence of in Blaine and Birch Bay area, are likely dead for the year. However, that means queens had the possibility of emerging from any nests that may have been in the area and forming new ones. So we have a lot of resources focused in those areas because there was a chance that there were some nests we didn't get to. Certainly we'll be watching the area of the nest that we did get to because we don't know exactly if we got all the queens. It seems like we did, but that's really the game plan from here. Is we know we had some activity in Birch Bay, we know we had some in Custer and in downtown Blaine, and we have those areas covered very well for this year in case new queens emerged, and we'll be hoping to start new nests this year.
My apologies. I was trying to scroll up to some of these questions in the chat. There was a question about how many sightings were there in BC last year and how many traps will be put out this year.
Yeah, I'm following the same chat discussion. There are a couple of things out here. First of all, about the whether or not the public can participate in putting out traps. By all means, they do, and in fact, we encourage beekeepers in the whole Fraser Valley, and there are in that target area that we have been surveying close to the border. There are approximately 170 beekeepers, and we really enjoy taking advantage of their expertise because they are familiar to recognize the difference between a sawfly and a hornet, or between a horntail and a hornet. So so we really like to use their expertise and their familiarity with these insects, and of course also their familiarity with stinging insects in particular. So we encourage those to put traps up, and these are bottle traps. Furthermore, we have various agencies from municipalities and parks and rec people and invasive species councils and First Nations and you name it. We got just about everybody involved to look for these things. So and anyone could certainly put up traps. We have a very simple design with a converted or changed 2-liter pop bottle, and that would suffice as a good wasp trap or a hornet trap. Last year, along that border, there's a grid system in place. We put up about 60 traps, and as I mentioned earlier, none of them were ever occupied with a Hornet, and we will increase this number this year simply because of the increased activity that is taking place in Washington State. We just want to make sure that we are doing basically a similar follow a similar strategy that Washington State does. We of course have here the Fraser Valley is obviously a geographically distinct area. We do not believe that these hornets are likely to move into the evergreen forests simply because their food sources will be diminished compared to what they find in the Fraser Valley itself. We therefore also believe that there is a diminishing rate of risk, if you will, with them spreading farther east into British Columbia, simply because there are so many climatic zones that they would have to overcome. And I also like to emphasize, because of the public's involvement and so many other people, that collectively at the end of the year, the human predation, if you will, the pressure of human predation will be very substantial. In other words, for any of these hornets to think that they will be successful in wintering or surviving a nest is greatly diminished because so many people will report the sightings and it will result in the destruction of nests. So I have a high level of confidence with everyone's involvement to control this invasive species.
And just continue on there was a question about whether there's any funding allocated from BC this year.
I didn't hear the voice very well, but if you are talking about funding, there is no particular limit that has been placed on my head that says you can only go so far. Here in British Columbia, we will do whatever it takes to make sure that we will address this issue appropriately.
Great. And if you could remute your line, Paul, that'd be great.
Yes, thank you.
One moment, please. I'm trying to scroll back up to the top here to get one of the. We've got Karen Larson. I'm not sure if you're still wanting to ask your question. I'm going to unmute you just in case. Karen, you are unmuted, but we cannot hear you. Okay, Karen, we couldn't seem to hear your question. If you might be able to send it in the chat, we can try to answer it that way. We'll move on down to, and I'm going to butcher this again, I should know this by now, Realia.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we sure can.
Okay, thank you for taking my question. I'm not sure if I need to direct this toward Anna or Paul or Sven, but I was trying, my question is, has there been a genetic link established between the Asian giant hornets found in BC and the ones found in Whatcom County / Washington State? Thank you.
I can address this a little bit. So certainly Paul was kind enough to lend us a specimen or two from the Nanaimo nest, and there is actually a study published where we compared that with the specimens from Blaine in 2019, specimens from Korea, a specimen from Japan, and a specimen from China. And the results of that paper basically indicated that the specimen from Nanaimo, British Columbia was a closer match with those found in Japan, and the specimens found in Blaine in 2019 were a closer match with those found in South Korea. We also went ahead and tested basically every specimen that we got in Washington last year that was part of the detections, and all of those are a genetic match for the same ones that we got in 2019 in Blaine. And can't really draw too many conclusions for that other than it seems like the nest from Nanaimo is different from the other nests we're dealing with, and we don't know anything about like the Langley and Abbotsford detections in British Columbia yet. And Paul, maybe you can fill us in on where we are with those right now.
Yes, thank you. In addition to what Sven just mentioned, I think what is really important and more significant is not so much to focus on the genetic makeup of all these different hornets per se, but what is more significant, in my view, is that it involves separate introductions of these hornets into the Pacific coastline of North America. And it means that here in British Columbia and in Washington state, and perhaps farther south as well, not to mention eastern Canada and the eastern seaboard altogether, that we will be prone to future introductions of these kinds of invasive species. And I think that is really where much of the focus should be at some point. Particularly in respect to controls of maritime shipments that are coming into our harbors. I think that is where, if I can call it a threat, but that is where the source of much of this material is coming from. So the genetic, the subspecies issue is very interesting from an academic perspective. But from a managerial perspective, an exposure perspective, it highlights the fact that we are subject to future introductions.
And I think that's part of the project that APHIS and ARS are working on to gather more specimens from different parts of the world and sequence those. So you heard Sven mention a handful of specimens that were included in that study. And so we'd like to collect more specimens to better understand the genetic diversity of this particular species so that we can understand if they were separate introductions or if they were likely to be separate introductions. So that is one of the projects that we are working on this year.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I'll just say to echo what Anne's saying there, that there's understanding that Asian giant hornets are actually a commodity within Asia disrupts their natural boundaries between subpopulations, which complicates this analysis and understanding where a particular introduction may have come from. But that's why our work to establish reference genome assemblies is important, as well as this larger initiative gathering samples within North America, as well as all of the native range within Asia, in order to map those to those references and understand how much diversity is present, so that we can kind of get a better sense of whether there are truly distinct populations. And that's where this effort is going, so that hopefully we can make a more definitive statement about whether there have been one or more introductions, and then we can carry that back to understanding the biology. Like Sven said, most Asian giant hornet populations are understood to nest in the ground, and there is one population that is understood to nest in trees, but I don't think that we can definitively say how opportunistic that is, and how frequently within any given population they do or don't nest in alternate places. And so this is all just active research area at this time.
Thanks so much, everyone. I don't know if Sven wants to take this one. There was a question about when Asian giant hornets, which months Asian giant hornets are most active.
Sure, I can handle this really quick. So Asian giant hornets spend the winter as a mated or an unmated queen, usually in a protected cell. In fact, I'll answer a second chat question by saying we think that's probably how it got here. They wanted to know what life stage. We believe it probably hitched a ride in some sort of commodity as a fertilized queen that was looking to spend the winter. They start to emerge as early as this time of year, and found their own nests as a single queen. And so any queen that's detected by the public and taken out of commission by collecting it basically destroys the chance for another nest to be formed. They will start to form a nest in early spring and throughout the summer, and eventually they will successfully rear a number of workers. The number of workers will increase greatly when those first set of workers kind of take over the duties of foraging and bringing food and building the nest and allow the queen to focus on egg laying. At this time in the summer, we think about July into September here. This is when the colony really starts to, increase in size. And then at some point towards the end of summer into early fall, they will make a switch over to kind of an active search for protein to help start rearing the next set of breeding cast, which is what we encountered when we eradicated our nest in the late fall of 2020. So that's kind of how it goes. We believe people are most likely to trap a hornet starting in July and through the months of November, and which is why we recommend anybody attempting to do citizen science trapping starts their trapping in July.
Thanks, Sven. I think this might have kind of been answered. I'll keep you on there. John Ryan asked, any idea how many Asian giant hornets may have survived the winter here? And if they survived, when would you expect to start seeing them become active?
Again, we would see queens start emerging any time now on warm days, and they'll start the activity of founding new nests. It's impossible for us to know how many may have survived the winter, as we don't actually know how many nests were out there. But to give you a good example, the nest we eradicated, we had approximately 500 specimens associated with that nest, and of those 500, about 200 were brand new virgin queens. Now we were able to take care of all of those, but there were some empty cells, and so we have to take that into account, and which is why we have traps all over that area as well in 2021. But our nest, which is considered a small nest, had about 200 queens in it, is what it looked like. And Paul, what was your feeling on the number of queens in the Nanaimo nest?
Oh, I do not know. Conrad would know that better. I would think that because we had a grand total of, I think, 200 specimens in this Nanaimo nest. So I do not know how many there were. I just do not know. But all of them were, as far as we know, there were not any virgin queens emerged yet. There were some drones, but no virgin queens were identified in the adult population. And that may well point in the fact that this was done in August, September of 2019, and it was just at the starting stages of this nest to develop its reproductive offspring. And perhaps we just nipped it in time, hopefully. And it would suggest, based on the 2020 survey, that we were successful and that no other nests had been established.
Thanks, Paul. We've got a question from Darren Kloster. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. I'm unmuting your line. You'll need to unmute from your side, and then you can ask your question.
Hi, it's Darren Kloster at the Times Colonist in Victoria. Some of my questions already been answered. I know that there, has always been scrutiny at the ports of entry in both Canada and the US. So there were some suggestions that the Nanaimo nest, some of those hornets may have come from a new vehicle processing plant that imported vehicles from Asia, and that they might have hitched in on an engine compartment. I know that we have to look for enough stuff at our ports, but is there some increased scrutiny on both sides of the border when looking at goods coming into our countries?
If I can answer this for British Columbia or for Canada, this typically falls under federal authority, and not just British Columbia, but across the province, across the country, all provinces are currently having contacted the federal government to emphasize the importance for them to review at least their inspection protocol, and if there are certain components lacking, that they will beef it up. So that this is an ongoing discussion that we have entertained with the federal government.
Thanks, Paul. And I'm not sure if if APHIS would like to respond to that as well.
Sure. The Asian giant hornet, and it's a quarantine pest. So if it was found in an imported shipment, phytosanitary action would be taken on the shipment to mitigate the threat. So it is a quarantine pest.
Thank you. Back to a chat question. Does WSDA plan to make any changes in how it tracks a hornet back to the nest? And I also just wanted to note for everyone, Chris Looney has joined now. So if you do have a question for Chris Looney specifically, he is now available and can take questions as well.
Okay, so regarding the tracking, we had started out with Bluetooth tags. The real benefit there being that should we lose the signal, anybody with a cell phone could log in and help us out. But we really felt that that signal was not strong enough, so we made the switch over to VHF radio tags. And during the pandemic, it actually takes 8 weeks to order those. So luckily for us, APHIS was able to come through and overnight a set raring and ready to go, and it worked out very well. In the meantime, the ones we had actually ordered have arrived, and so the change is that we will be using radio tags from the get-go. Rather than dental floss, we will probably switch to Kevlar Thread. We had noticed that one of the hornets we tied a tag to chewed it off as she was sitting just a few feet from our table, and you know, just asking Chris, it's really annoying to try to tag or tie a tag onto a hornet. So to watch her chew it off in a few seconds is disheartening. And so the Kevlar Thread is a suggestion from our friends in Jersey and Great Britain. They use this in their program. And we'll be running 3 units tracking the same tag, which is kind of nice. So that should basically enable us to triangulate it or even locate them even faster once they've been released. But the big difference for us is the signal carries further and it lasts a couple of weeks versus 12 hours. And so that lifts a little bit of the pressure off us. If she gets out of the area, we have fewer things looking for it, but we can find her from a longer distance, and we'll have 3 units going instead of just 1 in 2021.
Thanks, Sven. Karen got her question in the chat. She asks, do the experts feel like you are winning the battle against Asian giant hornet, especially in British Columbia?
Absolutely. Why would you think otherwise? No. Look, this is going to be an ongoing challenge, and at this point in time, it is hard to define success or I don't consider it failure at all, even if it manages to establish itself out here. This is a formidable task, and it's as what Sven just mentioned about the modern technology of radio tags and everything else. That's great. Of course, you first have to catch one of these characters in order to tag your devices onto it. And we have been, I admit, we have been genuinely frustrated by not getting enough of these darn hornets in our hands. And some of them we did, but they were thoroughly dead. So there is no reason for them to be tagged. So I hope you can appreciate the context in which we have to operate. As I mentioned earlier, these are apex predators, and there will be, under the best of circumstances, only very few of them around. And so the line between successful establishment and non-establishment is very difficult to conclude. At this point in time, we have full confidence that with all the efforts that we put in, together with what is happening in Washington State, that we have a half-decent chance of being very successful. Time will tell. And even if indeed they do establish themselves, again, what I was referring to earlier, human predation on these hornets will be so terrible that they will always have a rough time to establish themselves. Now, one thing that I like to add to it is that we have here in British Columbia a whole set of climatic zones that are proverbial barriers, if you will, for these hornets to be successful farther east. They could possibly go and travel farther east, but given their behavior and their favorite nest sites and the kind of prey that they feast on, will make it difficult for them. So our focus is very much on the Fraser Valley, because that is a very ideal environment to establish themselves in. I sympathize with my Washington friends because they have a much larger area particularly further south, that could be conducive to successful establishment. So yes, but at this point in time, we have no reason to believe that we will not be successful.
Great. I think Washington echo a lot of that. Paul, can you mute your line for a second? Hold on one moment.
I didn't hear this properly.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for muting your line, Paul. I think we're getting a little feedback when I speak and you're unmuted. So, but the next couple of questions are for you. They're wondering if BC will be using the same bait recipe as Washington State, and a sort of another trapping related question. Can you clarify how many traps will be used in BC and what style of trap? Paul, you're muted.
The traps that we have been using came from the Ministry of Environment, that have been used for other purposes. They were the easiest and the most successful to use, successful in relative terms in terms of handling them. There were some other models that we also used, and they were hard to open and to refill and all kinds of other problems. So we will go for the ones that we received from the Ministry of Environment. And again, the recipe of the bait itself was identical to what Sven mentioned before about juice and rice wine. I thought at times to use sake instead, but that runs the risk that I may end up drinking the sake instead of the wine rice coming into the rice wine to go into the trap. The point is that we have based these recipes on what was used in Japan, and that is why, as I mentioned earlier, we were so excited about that in Washington State they had developed some pheromone products that hopefully will be highly attractive to these hornets. So that is what we will be using as well. So much of the strategy that they are using is going to be the same out here, if I answered the question properly.
I think so. Thanks, Paul. And Charles Featherstone, I think I don't see the whole name. Yep, there we go. Charles Featherstone, I'm going to unmute your line. If you can unmute from your side, then you'll be able to ask your question.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this. I really appreciate it. A quick question for Anna Childers. Did you say that these the Asian giant hornets are commodities in Asia? And if that's exactly what you said, what do you mean by that?
Yes, it's considered a commodity. It's used, they're considered a delicacy, so they're eaten. And I think there's some other products made from them. So the nests are very valuable when they're found. So there's a lot of work to do to find them and dig them up at certain points in the year. And then those are moved around because of that. So that obviously, if they're moved around, there's the potential that the hornets aren't all completely dead, which would, again, potentially introduce or skew the natural dynamics and populations within there. So if the nests are being moved potentially between countries, the natural divisions between those subpopulations could break down. And so that's one of the things that we need to have this deeper dive into the data and more data to better understand the variation that's present in each country so that we can more correctly nail down the origin of the populations that are being found in the US. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very, very much. And I just want to make sure to confirm from all of the participants that because of the genetic difference, you're looking at the possibility of 2 separate introductions, correct?
We're looking to understand if there are separate introductions or if there is likely to be one introduction. So we're doing that extra work to figure out and learn more about the population genetics to be able to make that decision.
If I may add something to this, in May of 2019, so that was a few months before the infamous find of Vespa mandarinia on Vancouver Island in Nanaimo. In May of 2019, there was a giant hornet was collected in Vancouver Harbor. And this ended up being identified as being Vespa soror. Vespa soror is a sister species of Vespa mandarinia. It has a slightly different distribution in Asia, but again, it highlights, as I mentioned before, that we are here subject to future incursions of various types of hornets. And the one that is actually of much greater concern to us in the long term is going to be Vespa velutina. That is a smaller hornet, but also from Asia, that has infiltrated Western Europe in 2014 and has been going strong ever since. And the Europeans have spent over 20 million euros to try to combat it, to no success. And that is a far more ominous threat than Vespa mandarinia. So.
Yeah, and I'll just say along that point, that's one of the nice places where genome sequencing comes in, is that there's actually several large hornets in Asia, and some of them can be difficult to distinguish by eye because they don't all look exactly the same if they're from different regions. So by generating this genetic data, what we can do is then develop tools and marker kits so that we can quickly and accurately determine what species we have in a given location. And I think that that's one of the benefits of this project is going to be to help understand the taxonomy of the hornets within Asia that we might be coming into contact with. I suspect our collections within Asia, not all of them that come to us will actually in the end be Vespa mandarinia, but we'll get valuable data by having those specimens and getting this larger set of data from them.
Thanks, everyone. And I did want to point people, there have been a few questions about life cycle, and Tim Lawrence from WSU was kind enough to post the AGH life cycle chart that WSU developed in the chat. So there's a link to that there. I think it's also available on our website. And then there's a question from Megan asking, how serious of a threat are Asian giant hornets? What are the stakes here? I'll let you guys all flip a coin for who takes that one.
Well, if I can answer that then to start out with, there are three major issues here. The first one, of course, that is public health. Public exposure. This particular insect tends to favor, of course not all the time, but tends to favor ground nesting environments. It will establish itself in the ground, and by virtue of that much higher exposure being in the ground, it has developed over a long period of time and very strong defensive impulse when the nest is disturbed. And what we have seen in Nanaimo with the find of the nest out there in a public park, this was literally 5 or 6 feet away from a public pathway. If you are going to go on a Sunday afternoon walk with the family and with the dog puts the nose into the nest, then boom, there's a whole pile of these hornets coming out, and that is clearly a genuine hazard. It's not just merely public exposure, but also animals in general, wildlife that could be exposed, or livestock in certain areas where livestock can roam. So they are definitely a hazard in that sense. The second thing is, of course, it is recognized as a serious honeybee predator, and this is particularly the case in August and onward, when these hornet nests demand a great deal of animal protein, and they are going after the raiding of honeybee colonies. And then the third one, of course, is the ecological pressure that they may impose upon the local habitat, because they will be going after prey of all kinds. They are insect feeders, so they go after other insects, but that could also include other wasps and other hornets that are playing a vital role in looking after other insect populations. So again, it is an apex predator that will exert its influence in many different ways.
Thanks,
I have,
Paul. Oh, go ahead.
sure. Yeah, I have just a little bit to add to that. So what we experienced here in Washington in 2019 was we literally had a beekeeper in Blaine have 5 hives destroyed and fortunately collected 2 specimens to document that. A second beekeeper collected a specimen and sent it to Washington State University while attacking his apiary. We have some pretty famous shots of a very healthy hive basically having all of the members of its hive decapitated in 2019 and the brood stolen. And, you know, Paul said it the best. There just really aren't that many nests out there. And in 2019, we're looking at this. So we have what we don't know to be a well-established population, yet we're already seeing impact to our apiary industry. And so when you ask what is the serious threat, even past, you know, your dog or heaven forbid your child stumbling into a nest while walking through the woods, having an apiary taken out in the better part of less than a week, and the massive expense that the beekeeper would incur and what the ramifications are of having a beekeeper who is trusted by a farmer to come by and perform pollination services the next year. There are some cascading effects to agriculture that are actually really severe. And it's honestly, at least from WSDA's perspective, this is not a species, Asian giant hornet, that we want to tolerate here in the US and certainly not in Washington State. So I feel a little stronger about Paul's number 2 portion there. And then, of course, the ecological part was demonstrated to us full force in 2020 when the original homeowner who turned in the specimens that led us to detecting the nest basically collected them preying on wasp nests in his home and under the eaves of his home, and got some very nice photos of this. So we already know they're starting to impact some of the community. Now, as it turns out, the nests he was feeding on are invasive, not really invasive species, but non-native wasps here anyway. But that just goes to show that we don't know what kind of consequences that would have if Asian giant hornet was to become well established and take out, say, all wasps in the area. We just don't know what the impacts of that would look like. Certainly, when you remove one of the species from the ecosystem, it's going to have impacts. We just don't know what those are at this time. But my policy is let's not find out, because Asian giant hornet isn't supposed to be here anyway. And that's where we are with it.
Great, thanks, Sven. Grace Lim, I'm going to unmute your line so that, and you'll need to unmute from your side so that you can ask your question.
Thank you. This is Grace Lim from Q13 News in Seattle. I have 2 questions I think Sven can answer. The first one is, I spoke to some beekeepers and they are setting up experimental traps using grape juice and calpis. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. Can you expand on that? And then the second question is, if we don't eradicate the Asian giant hornet this year, is there some concern that they could spread south? Thank you.
Okay, so the first question. Yes, so we've been working with a beekeeper in Japan, and he traps every year. He traps for queens and workers and throughout the year, and he suggested a grape juice and calpis, which is CALPIS, is a fermented yogurt drink that is popular in Southeast Asia. It is for sale in some of the local grocery stores here. It's a little pricey for the American pocketbook, actually, but this is part of the recipe he uses. And then, of course, we also add the rice wine to that. And that is something that I ran as a test last year, as a suggestion from our beekeeping friend in Japan. And it had a slightly higher catch of some of our native Vespid species. And we also had a few beekeepers in the Whatcom County area, one in particular, had set up a whole line of traps testing this against orange juice and rice wine. And he also found that it had a slightly higher capture. Now, it's important to note that neither one of us collected Asian giant hornet with this, but because our Japanese friends swear by this mixture, and because we did a small trial last year and had some success with it, we felt that it was probably a good idea, since these ingredients are available here in the States, even though it's a little pricier to run this type of mixture, just to get a good baseline study done. And so we've asked for some assistance from the Beekeeping Club in Whatcom County, and some other beekeeping clubs in the state, and a few of them have taken us up, and we'll be working with them just to do some testing side by side with what we typically run. And that's, we would always prefer to go with what we know works, which is the orange juice and rice wine, but continue to look for things that are better, and that's part of that study. And then if you would not mind repeating your second question, I've talked so long that I forgot it.
Yeah, the second question was, if we don't eradicate the Asian giant hornet this year, is there some concern that they'll spread south?
Okay. Well, obviously, since the goal is eradication, every year that goes by, we risk losing control of it, if you will. Now, there's a lot of barriers to Asian giant hornet becoming established, as Paul mentioned, but Chris Looney, who's on this call, and a number of other researchers all released what I call predictive climate models. So where is it, and habitat suitability models. And basically speaking, our little area of the Pacific Northwest seems to be a really good deal until you get to the east side of the Cascades. And then you run a whole big stretch of land between here and the Mississippi River, where we really just don't feel like Asian giant hornet's going to feel at home or do very well at all, or if they do, it'll be in small pockets and they'll have a rough life. But after you get past the Mississippi River, it's starting to look pretty good for Asian giant hornet. So we want to make sure we continue with our messages of, if you see it, report it, and not necessarily just here. We want to make sure that our counterparts in other states are aware that we're dealing with it. We are going to do absolutely everything we can to make sure that we don't share our love with everyone else. But, things do happen. People do get crazy and move things around, sometimes on purpose, sometimes unintentionally, but things do happen. I mean, they ended up here. So our biggest concern is making sure that we're protecting agriculture all over the rest of the country. And yes, there are some areas south of here that are very suitable. So the pressure on us is always to eradicate as quickly as possible. But we also understand reality. We will continue to work at this as long as it is still practical to do so. And I've been asked this question many times. When I start seeing this pop up in multiple counties, multiple sites, that's when we'll know we've lost it. But right now, we are really still just in northern Whatcom County, and unfortunately in Paul's backyard. And so from us, we are optimistic, and we're going to keep at it. We may not get them all, but we will get as many as we possibly can.
Thanks, Sven. And there's sort of a related question from Nicole Jennings. How likely is it that Washington entomologists will catch all of the Asian giant hornets this year?
As likely as it can be. I assure you we will expend every effort and every resource that we have to make it happen. And, ultimately that is our goal. My personal thought is I would love to run a trapping program and catch absolutely nothing. And I would love Carla to work countless hours getting out the word and receive 0 reports. That's what we would love to get in 2021. But I'm also not naive. We will probably find some, but yeah, it's as likely as we will make it. But like Paul said, it is a daunting task.
Thanks.
And even though it is a daunting task, we do have a great team working on this, both from the federal side and on the state side, and then also in British Columbia. So we have our best minds really working on this and really working together in a very collaborative and productive way.
Thanks, and appreciate that comment. And Sven, I do look forward to working those countless hours to get the word out there. But all of you are helping us, and we appreciate you participating in this press conference. I think we're getting down to the last couple of questions here. Tim Lawrence, your hand is raised. I don't know if you have a question or a comment, but I'm gonna go ahead and unmute your mic.
I have a comment, and it goes a comment about impact on agriculture. I don't disagree that the potential is there, but I think that we should not go too overboard. It's important to know that the literature states that the so-called slaughter phase on honeybee hives is relatively rare. It is not something that occurs that often. And some of the reports of Asian giant hornet destruction can be attributed to other factors. I found a colony with massive numbers of dead bees, all of their heads decapitated on Whidbey Island just this week. So things happen, and it's not necessarily causation of the Asian giant hornet, just because you find lots of dead bees. So I think we just need to temper the overall impact that it's currently having. It certainly has the potential to be a problem, but it is not there. In regard to its effect on larger agriculture, beekeepers are very good at mitigating. And your raspberries, your blueberries bloom earlier in the year. Most beekeepers who are migratory will move their bees out of the area and not have a negative impact on agriculture as a result. So I just think we need to temper that concern, but understand that the potential is real. So,
if I may add something to that, is the fact that I tend to concur with you, Tim. Beekeepers are extraordinarily innovative in the devices that they develop in order to stave off these predators. And I have been, quite honestly, inundated with all kinds of wild suggestions, from trapping devices to you name it under the sun. And I have quite a bit of confidence in actually the innovative minds of many of the beekeepers. They're good at keeping bees, but they're also good at doing all kinds of other nasty things to the hornets. So yes, it will have an impact, and mostly these predators have an impact on neglected hives or poorly managed colonies. The good beekeeper is on top and will probably, shall we say, minimize the impact of these hornets. So it is definitely going to have an impact, but not one that is going to face disaster. I'm far more concerned about the ecological impact that these insects will have, and perhaps the potential public exposure in areas where the public is walking around and maybe exposed to a nest or something. If I may just add to that, because I see here in the chat line a couple of other questions, and that is one of them. I might as well answer it if you don't mind. And it has to do is, can Canadians report and get more information about these traps and everything else? Yes, we're going to be posting more material on the government website. We also have a number of reporting sites in British Columbia where any kind of suspect looking character can be reported. And I recall from the 2020 year that my schedule was totally upside down, because I spent just about every day through much of 2020 for 3 or 4 hours answering reports that came in of people that detected a yellow jacket or a lovely bumblebee or all kinds of other things. And we don't want to discourage the public to report these things, so we respond to them. So yes, there are many different ways of reporting these things.
Thanks, Paul. I think that's a great way to really wrap up. We are kind of over the time that we allotted. I don't see any more questions. But again, before we totally wrap up, I'd like to reiterate that point of how much we appreciate you helping us get the public to report every hornet every time they see one. Thank you. And as usual, if you need further assistance, you can contact myself or the appropriate agency media contacts, all of whom are listed on that press release that we issued on Monday and is posted on our website at agr.wa.gov. Thanks, everyone, and we really appreciate your participation in this joint virtual press conference.